Hi, today we're talking about adjective phrases and appositive phrases. First, as a reminder, a phrase is a group of words that does not have both a subject and a predicate. So our phrase is not a complete thought. It is some words that are helping to add context or detail to something in a sentence. Specifically, adjective phrases and appositive phrases both add detail to more fully describe a noun. So first, an adjective phrase starts with an adjective and describes a noun. So that makes sense because we know that adjectives in general describe nouns. So first example, the professor, thoughtful and eloquent, inspired his students every time he spoke. So here, my adjective phrase, thoughtful and eloquent, is describing the subject of the sentence, the professor. And it's actually acting as an interrupting phrase right now because it appears in the middle of the sentence between the subject and the verb, right? So you see how that sentence could have just been, the professor inspired his students every time he spoke, but I interrupted that with the adjective phrase to explain some of the traits that this professor has. As another example, I have detailed, analytical, and well-structured. The essay was one of the best in the class. And here you notice I have the whole independent clause after the adjective phrase. So here the adjective phrase is acting as an introductory phrase because it comes first. It's introducing the rest of the sentence. And this one sets up a little bit of suspense, I think, because we don't know what it is that is detailed, analytical, and well-structured until after I've gotten through that whole adjective phrase. All right, so appositive phrases, as I noted at the beginning, has the same purpose as an adjective phrase, and that it's adding detail. It's just doing that in a little bit of a different way. So an appositive phrase is a noun phrase that renames a noun to add detail. So if I have a straightforward subject, so for example, in my first example on the left, the professor is a straightforward subject. My appositive phrase is going to rename that professor with a bit more detail. So I have the professor, a thoughtful and eloquent lecturer, inspired his students every time he spoke. So my appositive phrase, you see it conveys exactly the same additional information as my adjective phrase does. It just is acting as a noun, right? Because it is taking the professor, renaming him a thoughtful and eloquent lecturer. I'm going to do the same thing with the essay. An analytical masterpiece. The essay was one of the best in the class. So again, I have my introductory phrase. This time it's an appositive phrase because it is a noun phrase. It is calling the essay an analytical masterpiece. So one really awesome use for both adjective and appositive phrases are to try to highlight the significance of something. And there's two reasons why these types of phrases are good for highlighting significance. The first is that they slow the sentence's pace, right? So if you think about the examples on the previous slide, if you have your adjective phrase or your appositive phrase interrupt the main clause, it kind of pauses for a second, right? So you're like getting extra information and waiting for the verb, right? They're not adding extra action, they're just adding extra detail. And then because they are adding extra detail, they can also emphasize something about a concept, whatever noun it is that they're modifying. So I put some examples on here from the United Nations Global Sustainability Goals. So reduced inequality is one of the UN's goals for all countries to work towards. So I thought that was a good example to highlight the significance of it. So here I have an adjective phrase that's an interrupting phrase, and I formatted it as reduced inequality, critical to ensuring all voices are heard, ought to be a top global priority, right? So you hear how that both emphasizes the importance of reduced inequality, right? Explaining it is critical to ensuring all voices are heard. And it also slows down the pace of that sentence a little bit to make you think about it, right? It makes you spend a little bit more time in that sentence, which emphasizes it. I just gave you the flip of that, so you can put put that adjective phrase first if you want to. Critical to ensuring all voices are heard. Reduced inequality ought to be a top global priority. Same sentence, just rearranged. And then I also gave you appositive phrases. Again, same meaning. So reduce inequality. An absolute necessity for all countries ought to be a top global priority, right? So here I have renamed reduce inequality an absolute necessity, right? Thus making that an appositive phrase. And then I just gave you that last example where I used my appositive phrase as the introductory phrase by putting that first. All right, and again, same effects as the adjective phrases, slowing down the sentence's pace, making the reader spend more time in it, and adding detail to emphasize how important my concept is. So that is all for today. Thank you for listening.